Police violence in Norrköping, Sweden. Chapter 1: Handcuffs, Screams, and Pepper Spray. This is a true story. Source: Sweden Herald. Officer convicted for misconduct after pepper spraying handcuffed man. Date of publication: November 6, 2023. Incident date: August 2023. Location: Norrköping, Sweden. The summer of 2023 brought an unexpected wave of public outrage and national reflection to the otherwise peaceful Swedish city of Norrköping. A mobile phone video, casually captured by a pedestrian and posted on social media, spread like wildfire across the internet. What it revealed was not just an isolated act of brutality, but a moment that shook the public's trust in the institutions meant to protect them. In the shaky footage, a man, later identified as Jamal Al-Karim, a resident of foreign descent, lay on the ground. His hands were restrained tightly behind his back with steel handcuffs. He was not resisting. He was not armed. He was already subdued. Yet, what followed stunned the nation. A uniformed police officer, known publicly only by his initials LN, approached Jamal from the side. Without any visible provocation, without any struggle or resistance, the officer pulled a can of pepper spray from his utility belt and, at point-blank range, discharged it directly into Jamal's face. The man screamed in agony. His body writhed, not out of resistance, but out of pure, uncontrolled pain. Witnesses could be heard gasping in the video. One voice even shouted, "He's already down. Why are you doing that?" But the officer walked away, indifferent. According to eyewitnesses interviewed later, Jamal had been pulled over for playing loud music in his car. That was all. What should have been a simple interaction escalated, first into an arrest, and then into an act of unprovoked violence by someone in a position of authority. After being ordered out of the vehicle and engaged in a brief verbal argument with the officer, Jamal was taken down and handcuffed. It was after the arrest, when Jamal posed no threat whatsoever, that Officer LN decided to use chemical force. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media in Sweden exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForJamal, #Polisvåld, police violence, and #Norrköpingsincident. Prominent civil rights organizations and even elected officials demanded a transparent investigation. "This is not just about misconduct," one human rights lawyer tweeted. "This is about abuse of power and possibly racial profiling." The video made its way to every major Swedish news outlet within 24 hours. The Swedish Prosecution Authority announced an official review, and the Special Investigation Department opened a formal case into Officer LN's actions. Jamal Al-Karim, a 32-year-old originally from Syria who had been living in Sweden for over a decade, gave a statement through his lawyer a few days later. In it, he said, "I was treated like I was not human. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just asked, 'Why are you doing this?' I came to this country to feel safe. But now, I don't know who to trust anymore." His statement resonated deeply with many members of Sweden's immigrant communities, people who already feared that they were treated differently by law enforcement. In the following days, the Norrköping Police Department issued a carefully worded press release. They stated that the matter was being reviewed internally and that use of force protocols will be assessed. But for many, it felt like an attempt to deflect public anger rather than to acknowledge systemic problems. Public protests began outside police stations in Norrköping and later spread to Stockholm, Malmö, and Gothenburg. "Enough is enough," read one protester's sign. Another, held by a teenage girl of Iraqi descent, read, "We are not dangerous. We are in danger." At the heart of this uproar was a deep and painful question. Would this have happened if Jamal had been white and Swedish? While Sweden is known globally for its progressive politics, strong social systems, and high trust in institutions, critics argue that racism, both structural and subtle, still poisons parts of its police system. Several independent studies in recent years have shown that people of Middle Eastern, African, and Roma backgrounds are far more likely to be stopped, searched, and subjected to force by Swedish police. In the video, what many saw was not just brutality, but a reflection of that deeper, hidden prejudice. Chapter 1 of this story is not just about one man being sprayed in the face. It's about the growing cracks in Sweden's carefully curated image of justice, equality, and peace. As the case against Officer LN moved forward, the question was no longer just, what did this officer do? It became, what kind of system allows this to happen? Chapter 2, A Lie in the Report, The Truth in the Camera. The investigation began under the sharp eye of Sweden's Special Police Investigation Unit, a department known for handling internal affairs when officers are suspected of misconduct. As public outrage grew louder following the viral video, authorities had no choice but to act swiftly. The country was watching. But what they uncovered next only deepened the scandal. When Officer LN, the man seen in the video pepper spraying a handcuffed civilian, filed his official police report, his description of the incident told a completely different story. In his statement, he claimed that Jamal Al-Karim, the man who had been arrested, had exhibited aggressive physical resistance. LN further wrote that Jamal twisted his body violently and attempted to spit at officers, which allegedly prompted the need for chemical restraint. It was, on paper, a textbook justification. But it was also a lie. When investigators reviewed the raw footage taken by the bystander's mobile phone, frame by frame, they saw none of the resistance described. Jamal was already on the ground, hands cuffed behind his back, sitting motionless. He did not spit, nor did he struggle or attempt to escape. In fact, his body language was the opposite, subdued, passive, and visibly terrified. This video evidence stood in direct contradiction to the officer's official narrative. The matter escalated quickly. Investigators from the Office of Police Conduct Review, OPCR, Sweden's equivalent of an Internal Affairs Bureau, opened a formal inquiry not only into the use of force, but also into the possibility of falsifying official documents, a criminal offense under Swedish law. They began by reconstructing the timeline of the incident using GPS data, officer bodycam timestamps, which curiously had not been activated during the most critical moment, and of course, the bystander video. They also summoned witnesses who had been present at the scene. One by one, the stories matched. He just looked at him and sprayed. No warning, no struggle, nothing, said one witness. I heard the man cry, I didn't do anything, just before the spray hit his face, said another. These testimonies align precisely with the video, providing a damning contrast to Officer LN's report. Swedish law, like many democratic legal systems, treats false reporting by a law enforcement official as a grave breach of public trust. Police are empowered with extraordinary authority to detain, to search, to use force. In exchange, society demands a strict code of honesty and accountability. When that trust is violated, the consequences ripple far beyond a single case. The final report from the OPCR was blunt in its conclusion. The officer in question used force in a situation where it was clearly unnecessary, and attempted to justify his actions by presenting a falsified version of events in his report. This constitutes not only a violation of police conduct but also criminal falsification of public documents. The implications were explosive. This was no longer just about an act of police violence. It had now evolved into a cover-up. Legal analysts were quick to weigh in. While excessive force is often defended or dismissed as split-second decision-making, deliberate falsification after the fact is more difficult to excuse. It's not a reaction, it's a calculated attempt to erase accountability. And it wasn't the first time. Several Swedish journalists began digging into Officer Ln's professional record. What they found was troubling. While he had no prior convictions or official disciplinary actions, there were multiple complaints filed against him over the past 5 years, all quietly dismissed or shelved. Most involved minority individuals, and most involved claims of unnecessary aggression or intimidation. None had resulted in formal reprimand. Now, in the spotlight of a national scandal, those ignored complaints resurfaced with renewed importance. Critics accused the system not only of failing to protect Jamal, but of enabling the culture that allowed officers like Ln to act with impunity. In televised debates, legal experts and civil rights activists asked the same question again and again. If the bystander hadn't filmed this, would anyone have believed Jamal? That single question struck a nerve across Sweden. The police force issued a new statement acknowledging the serious nature of the allegations. But for many citizens, particularly those from immigrant backgrounds, it rang hollow. Trust was already fractured. Now it was beginning to collapse. Jamal, through his lawyer, gave a short press conference. They didn't just hurt me physically. They tried to erase what really happened. If not for the video, they would have gotten away with it. And how many times have they already? This chapter in the unfolding tragedy revealed a brutal truth about power, that those who wield it can not only harm, but also rewrite the story unless someone is there to capture the truth. A phone. A witness. A video. In that lens, Sweden saw a reflection it could no longer ignore. Chapter 3: The Trial, the Conviction, and the Wound of Trust. The courtroom of Norrköping District Court was packed. Journalists, activists, legal experts, and concerned citizens filled the wooden benches. For many, this case was no longer about one man, one officer, or even one moment of violence. It had become a symbol of something much deeper, the integrity of Swedish justice, and whether the system was truly accountable when power was abused. Seated across from each other were two very different figures. On one side, Officer Ln, the police officer charged with excessive use of force and filing a false report. Dressed in a navy blue suit, his demeanor was stoic, but the tension in his clenched jaw was unmistakable. On the other, Jamal Al-Karim, the victim, now a symbol for many of the voiceless in Sweden's marginalized communities. Though he sat quietly, his presence carried the weight of countless others who had felt powerless before the law. The trial opened with a simple but powerful declaration from Jamal's attorney. This is not merely a case about pepper spray. This is about the abuse of power, the humiliation of a human being, and the violation of the public trust. The prosecution presented the evidence, the now widely seen video footage, the contradictory police report, and testimonies from multiple eyewitnesses who had no connection to Jamal, yet described the same scene: a defenseless man, not resisting, being sprayed at close range without provocation. The defense tried to argue that Officer LN felt threatened and was operating under pressure. But under cross-examination, his statements faltered. The judge questioned him directly about the inconsistencies between his written report and the video evidence. "You described a man who fought you. Yet we see a man sitting still, in handcuffs. How do you explain that?" LN paused. His only answer: "It's possible I misremembered the intensity of the moment." But it wasn't just a memory lapse, it was, as the court would later rule, a deliberate distortion of events. The court took particular note of the fact that LN had failed to activate his body camera, in violation of police procedure, while also filing a report that omitted key details, a red flag that suggested intent to deceive. After several days of testimony, the court delivered its verdict. Guilty. The judge found Officer LN guilty on 2 counts. Official misconduct, abuse of power through unnecessary use of force. Falsification of an official document, knowingly submitting a false report to misrepresent the incident. In delivering the sentence, the judge read from the bench. "A democratic society rests upon the principle that power must be exercised responsibly. When those entrusted to enforce the law manipulate it instead, they undermine the very foundation they are meant to uphold." The court sentenced LN to 6-month suspension from duty without pay, mandatory participation in a human rights re-education course, a monetary fine, proportionate to his salary, designated for a National Victim Support Fund. However, this ruling sparked mixed reactions. For some, it was a small but important victory. It was rare, after all, for a police officer in Sweden to face public trial, let alone be convicted. The courtroom had sent a message: no one is above the law. But for many others, especially within Sweden's immigrant communities, the sentence felt too light. 6 months off duty? A fine? Some retraining? If Jamal had attacked the officer, would he have gotten away with a fine and a lecture? One community leader asked on national television. This doesn't feel like justice, it feels like a polite warning to those in uniform. Organizations such as Civil Rights Defenders, Amnesty International Sweden, and grassroots activist groups released statements urging greater police oversight, stronger internal review mechanisms, and the creation of truly independent civilian review boards with legal authority, not just advisory roles. Public debate intensified. In opinion columns and TV panels, legal scholars debated what this case revealed about institutional culture within Sweden's police force. Were officers being adequately trained in de-escalation? Were disciplinary structures too lenient? And most importantly, were minorities in Sweden receiving equal protection under the law, or being targeted by it? For Jamal, the court's decision was less about vindication and more about survival. Now diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, he had been unable to return to work since the incident. Public attention had made him both a symbol of hope and a target of online abuse. Yet, despite the emotional toll, he agreed to give an interview to Sveriges Radio shortly after the verdict. His voice trembled but remained clear. "I will never trust the police again. I don't care about the money. I care about dignity. I care about my son growing up in a country where the police don't lie to cover their mistakes. I hope this case is a lesson. Not just for officers, but for all of us. Those words, "I will never trust the police again," landed heavily across the nation. In the weeks that followed, Sweden's parliament held a series of hearings on law enforcement accountability. Politicians from various parties promised reforms, but skepticism remained. Too many promises had been made before. Too few had been kept. Still, the case left an indelible mark. Not only had it exposed the fragility of trust between the police and the people they serve, but it also highlighted how easily that trust could be broken, and how hard it is to restore. A man was violated. A lie was told. A system was tested. And a wound was left, not just on the face of a man who had been sprayed while handcuffed, but on the conscience of a nation. Could this be a case of racism? As featured in Dagens Nyheter, translated and expanded from commentary and analysis published following the Norrköping District Court case, 2023. When the Norrköping District Court delivered its verdict in the controversial police misconduct case involving Jamal Al-Karim, it brought temporary closure to one legal chapter, but opened a far deeper, more uncomfortable discussion across Sweden. Was racism at the root of this incident? It is a question that lingers, not because it is easy to answer, but because it is necessary to ask. The answer, in short, is yes, it very well could be. While proving racist intent in a court of law remains notoriously difficult, the context, severity, and pattern of the incident strongly suggest that racial prejudice, whether conscious or unconscious, may have played a role. Left-pointing magnifying glass. Why do many believe racism is involved? 1. The victim was a migrant. Jamal Al-Karim, the man sprayed with pepper spray while restrained, is of Middle Eastern descent and a legal immigrant to Sweden. This is not incidental. Numerous studies across Europe, including those conducted by Amnesty International and the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA, have consistently shown that ethnic minorities, especially Black and Middle Eastern men, are disproportionately targeted by police. A 2021 Amnesty International Sweden report cited growing concern over ethnic profiling, where police disproportionately stop, search, or use force against individuals based on appearance rather than behavior. Was Jamal's treatment part of this pattern? According to Dagens Nyheter, the answer must be considered within the broader European context, where minority populations often suffer not only from over-policing but also from under-protection. In other words, they are more likely to be treated as suspects and less likely to be treated as victims. 2. Disproportionate force over a minor incident. The original reason cited for police involvement was a noise complaint, music playing too loudly. This is hardly a criminal offense. Yet within a short span of time, the situation escalated into Jamal being handcuffed, forced to the ground, and pepper sprayed at close range while restrained. This overreaction is not just troubling, it is telling. Human rights observers have long noted that escalation of force in minor encounters is far more likely when the suspect belongs to a minority group. Implicit bias, often unconscious, causes officers to perceive more threat from non-white individuals, even when their behavior is compliant. As one expert from the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights stated in a post-trial panel, the question is not simply whether the officer was racist. The question is whether his decision-making was affected by racial bias. All signs point to yes. 3. Use of force on a restrained, defenseless person. Spraying pepper spray into the face of a handcuffed individual, who posed no visible threat, is not standard police procedure in Sweden, or anywhere in Europe. It is a violation of both national police policy and international human rights standards. Why, then, did the officer proceed? Would he have done the same had the individual in question been a white Swede in a suit, rather than a Middle Eastern man in a modest apartment? This hypothetical was raised by multiple columnists and rights groups. The Svenska Dagbladet editorial board wrote bluntly, "The likelihood that a native Swede would be treated in the same manner under the same circumstances is exceedingly low. And therein lies the silent scandal." 4. Wider pattern of racial disparity in Sweden. Sweden, despite its progressive self-image, has been repeatedly criticized for ignoring the reality of institutional racism. Reports from the Swedish Equality Ombudsman, Diskrimineringsombudsmannen, have highlighted systemic disparities in housing, employment, and law enforcement. A 2020 FRA study found that over 50% of people of African descent in Sweden believe they are discriminated against in everyday life. Among men aged 18 to 35, many report negative or aggressive interactions with police, including unwarranted stops and searches. The Jamal case was not isolated. Rather, it became a lightning rod for long-simmering grievances in neighborhoods across Malmö, Gothenburg, and Stockholm, where minority communities feel over-policed and under-respected. Pushpin, did the court acknowledge racism? No, not directly. Swedish courts require direct and specific evidence of racist motivation to categorize an act as a hate crime or racially aggravated offense. In Jamal's case, no racial slurs were uttered, and no explicit racist statements were presented in court. As a result, the judge avoided addressing race altogether, focusing strictly on the abuse of power and false reporting. However, this judicial restraint does not mean racism was absent. As Katarina Berg, head of Amnesty International Sweden, noted in a televised interview, racism doesn't always come in the form of insults or tattoos. Sometimes, it's found in silence, in who gets pepper sprayed and who doesn't. In whose word is believed and whose is dismissed. In which cases are treated as anomalies and which are ignored altogether. Speech balloon, public reactions and ongoing debate. The aftermath of the trial saw vigils, protests, and panel discussions across Sweden. Civil rights organizations demanded mandatory bias training for all police officers, independent civilian oversight boards, transparent reporting of police misconduct data, disaggregated by race and ethnicity. The Swedish National Police Commissioner, under public pressure, acknowledged that more work needs to be done to address trust gaps with minority communities. Still, activists were unimpressed. One sign at a protest in Norrköping read, "If Jamal was white, would he be blind in one eye today?" Final reflection: what is at stake? This case is not just about one man's suffering, nor even one officer's abuse of authority. It is about how deeply bias can hide in the folds of daily institutions, how subtly it operates, and how fiercely it must be confronted. Jamal's trauma is personal. The implications are national. If Sweden, a country often praised for fairness and human rights, cannot acknowledge and confront racial bias within its law enforcement, what hope remains for other nations? The question that remains unanswered, yet must be asked again and again, is this: if the victim were white, would this have happened? Until that question can be confidently answered no, the fight against systemic racism continues, not only in Sweden, but across the democratic world.